Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show. This week, we speak to an investor who arrived in Australia with just $4,500 to his name. And in less than 20 years, has built a property portfolio most people would only dream of. All this and much more in this week's episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show. My name is Phil Tarrant. I am a property investor. I'm also the editor of Smart Property Investment. Welcome to the show. I'm pumped about today's episode. I've got two people in our podcast studio. The first to join us is Vivian Kelly, who is the editor across all of our mortgage and real estate products here at Sterling Publishing. Welcome, Viv.
Thanks, Phil.
For a lot of people that read Smart Property Investment regularly, you're probably quite used to seeing Vivian's byline. She's been working across SPI for quite a number of years, and I've brought her into this podcast to be sort of my eyes and ears and knowledge pool for chatting with our special guest, Victor Kumar. Victor, welcome.
Thank you, Phil. Good to be here.
It's good to have you, mate. So Victor is it's one of the guys who was really integral to the way I see the world with property investing. 4.5 years ago when I got going, before I had any properties whatsoever, I met Victor through my mortgage broker. And he introduced me, and Victor at the time was buyer's agent, still is a buyer's agent, he's a very good buyer's agent. But Victor is he's a passionate property investor. He's been doing it for a number of years. But I've asked Victor to come in today just to really share his story. Very early days when I met Victor, and I was green-eyed and bushy-tailed and wanted to know everything property. I was fortunate that Victor was spent a lot of time with me, just educating me on the way the world works. And he's got a particular way of investing, and it's a strategy which I think is it's fundamental to getting results in property. It's not a tricky strategy. It's not a complicated strategy. It's just a very, very simple approach to investing in property, which is based on finding under market value properties and getting them cheap and making sure they're going to go up in value, and you've got renters in there paying the mortgage off. So, Victor, mate, let's start with you. Mate, what's your story? I know you've got an interesting background in terms of how you ended up doing what you do today. And by the way, Victor has a lot of investment properties. I knock around with a lot of guys that work in this space, and they've all got substantial portfolios. And Victor rolls with one of the largest ones I know, and it's really impressive. And I think he's accomplished that in about all of 19 years, haven't you, mate?
That's right, Phil. So my background's I'm a migrant, as you have already guessed from my accent, which I'm covering really well these days. So I arrived in the country actually on 26th of February in 1997. So my wife and I landed here at 2:46 exactly. And between the two of us, we had $4,500 to our names. We're fortunate that we came in as high demand employees, so high demand professionals, because we were radiographers, so zapping people with x-rays and ultrasound. And we found jobs pretty much straight away. And one of the first questions I asked my brother-in-law, who's a true blue Aussie, was, how do people make money in this country? Because I thought, we are in a new country, we might as well make something out of it. And he mentioned bricks and mortar. And to be honest, I had no clue what bricks and mortar was. I mean, when we had landed, we were given a Aussie slang dictionary. So I went to that and said, okay, what's bricks and mortar? And realized they were houses. So we made a point of educating ourselves in the first few years about anything and everything there was about property and business, so that we were well armed before we actually rolled the dice to actually start investing.
So you landed here. Where do you come from? Was home originally for you?
Yeah, I'm from Fiji.
So you had English as a good background language.
That's right.
And you walked straight into a job in the hospital?
Pretty much, yeah. I landed at 2:46. I had a job at 4 p.m.
Okay. And back in 1997, you would have been earning how much as a radiographer?
Oh, thousands. 37,000 to be exact.
$37,000. So back then it was a reasonable wage. It was a reasonable wage.
Yeah.
And it was enough to get going and get yourself established, no doubt, here in Australia, which is great. And at what point in time were you working there, as a radiographer, probably doing big hours and stuff, and your wife was doing the same thing, that you went, hang on a second, I'm going to start this property thing. I've educated myself, and I've read all the books, and I've done this, that, and the other. When did you go, all right, it's time to do this, and how did you do it?
To take a step back, when we came here, we actually lived in my sister's garage.
Okay.
And coming from a tropical climate to the Australian climate, it was still cold for us. So we were freezing in the nights, and we had all of our stuff put on shelves above our bed. our older possession, and we'd go to work and we'd hear about these people having beautiful homes and so forth. So I decided to go to bank and try for a loan. And I just bought a car, a beat up old Corolla, which I parked in front of the Liverpool Westpac branch in a quarter-hour parking zone, and went in and asked for a home loan. And they turned around and said, "Well, we can't lend you money, even though you've shown a good savings history, because you actually don't have any credit history with us."
Okay.
And I got so upset that I actually walked back home, because I forgot I had a car, because I didn't have a car in Fiji.
Yeah.
So, and when my wife came back in the evening at 7 o'clock, she said, "Oh, where's the car?" So we rushed back out, and there it was, no ticket, hadn't been towed away. So It was an omen.
Yeah.
One of the things I did was I persevered. So I kept asking the question, how can I get a loan? And eventually, one of the real estate agents pointed me in the direction of a broker, and he got us our first loan, and that got us into our first property, which instinctively I gravitated towards a cheaper price property as opposed to a more expensive. So the first house that I bought, which was a year after I'd arrived, was a $137,000 three-bedroom house in a suburb called Currans Hill, which is in the Camden Council area in New South Wales. And that became pretty much the cornerstone of my portfolio.
So Victor's story, Viv, in terms of having trouble finding or getting finance straight off the bat, that's a common story, right? We hear it all the time across people that we speak to with Smart Property Investment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm often contacted by people saying that they just can't work out how to get their first loan because, as Victor mentioned, they might not have a history of borrowing or anything to show, particularly if they've lived at home for their entire lives. They've avoided getting a credit card to try and save, so they don't actually have any proof that they can pay back a loan or that they are responsible financially. A lot of people are also gifted deposits and think that that's enough to get started, but then they go to the banks and the banks are sort of turning them away because they don't have any evidence that they're going to pay the loan back.
Do you reckon it's good practice? The question for both of you guys is, even if you don't need debt and you're a uni student and you're out sort of drinking beer and going to courses and messing around doing what you do when you're that age, should you get some sort of debt and show the bank that you can actually manage your finances? Victor, is that a smart thing to do?
Yes and no. Because you got to be careful that you actually are paying the debt off. Yeah, it's very easy to get debt in this country these days, and of course it's always substantially harder because we are always enticed by all these ads of no interest repayment for 2 years and so forth. So the easiest thing I would suggest is get a small limit of a credit card, so maybe a $2,000 credit card, and religiously pay it off each month, and run your expenses through that, and that'll build some level of credit history as well.
So do you think that would have been sufficient enough when you first walked in that branch in Liverpool and said, "Mr. Bank Manager, can I have some cash?" You think you would have gone, yeah, all right. You seem to be a upstanding citizen that pays his debt. Do you think that was the fundamental stumbling block why you couldn't get that mortgage finance?
It pretty much was, and actually one of the things that the bank manager actually suggested was to go out and get a credit card, and that was my first ever credit card as well, which I still hold.
So the first property you bought was, remind me again, how much?
It's $137,000 in Currans Hill. So it was bought in August 1998.
98. Do you still have it?
I still have it.
What's it worth now?
It's conservatively, it's worth $550.
So it's gone up a little bit.
It's gone up a little bit, yeah.
So you've been at this for 18, 19 years now, right?
Yeah. Well, I've owned it for now 18 years.
18 years. So it's pretty much doubled in value and then pretty much doubled again.
That's right. Yeah. The rent I get on that at the moment is $430 a week.
$430. So on the original purchase price, it's a great yield.
That's a great yield, yeah.
How many times do you refinance that to use that equity to try and keep going? And let's have a chat about that, actually. Yeah.
When I initially started, I actually didn't know that you could actually use the equity out of the property. So what I was doing was paying that down and thinking that, okay, I have to pay it right down before I can use the money.
Was that principal and interest loan?
It was principal and interest, yes. Yeah. I didn't know any better.
Yep.
Yeah. So we were just madly working and pumping it down. So my first property, the investment property that happened was really a accident. I actually had an accident at Liverpool Hospital, hurt my back, and a massive work cover payout of $8,000. Yeah. And, I then started, because I was already reading the books, and one of the books that I initially read was Jen Summers' book.
Brilliant book.
Brilliant book, yeah. And
I highly recommend it. Even though it's 20 years old now, I highly recommend anyone who wants to go in property investment read that book for fundamentals.
Absolutely. It's still very relevant today, yeah. So, they were talking about in the book about, using equity and using money to... any windfall that you have to pay off your home loan, and also use the equity. So I've started thinking about it, and then I decided, you know what, it's all too hard. I'll use the whole $8,000 as a deposit for another property. And so that's how my first investment property eventuated.
Okay.
Which was
first property was a house for you to live in?
That's correct,
okay.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. Your principal place of residence?
Correct,
yep.
Yeah. So my first investment property was a two-bedroom unit in Campbelltown, which I bought in 1999. Coincidentally also in August. So it was exactly a year from the settlement of my first house.
Victor, when you talk about equity, I get contacted by readers all the time who worry that with the boom that we've had in Sydney, if they extract equity and then prices go down, they're going to find themselves in a bit of trouble. So what would you say to those people who are concerned about using equity when people are questioning that prices might not keep going up?
It is a valid concern, and I'm all about not over-leveraging, because you need to make sure that you keep your exit options open. So if things go wrong, you are still able to refinance to another lender or even sell down the property, so that you're not caught in a down market with absolutely no equity behind it. Having said that, though, what you need to also do is use the equity in the property well, so that you are also leveraging into other properties, but across your portfolio you need to have a baseline of 70 to 80% LVR.
So from your first investment property in Campbelltown, 1999, price was?
Massive, $70,000.
$70,000 bucks.
Yes.
You still own the property today?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And that is one of my regrets. I actually sold that property. And I sold that and a couple of other properties back in year 2000, 2001, really, to fund our so-called retirement. Because we actually did retire. We tried retirement back in 2001.
Okay.
And we lasted exactly 6 months.
Just got bored?
That, plus there was one small word we had forgotten. Cash flow. Yeah.
Cash flow is king. And, you've raised an extremely good point about, equity. And the term is recycling your equity. So you purchase a property, it goes up in value to a point where you can extract your equity, hopefully at a sort of 80% LVR. You can go up to 90% LVR. Then you use that equity that you've extracted to be the deposit for the next property. And the idea is that you just keep doing that time and time again. And that's what I've done in my property portfolio. I injected a bit of cash in the front end, but now it's just really, if I want to buy again, I just extract equity because I'm buying in good places. The place is going up in value. I'm comfortable to take that money out. But with my portfolio is that there's cash flow concerns. So, what you're saying is that you got to a point when you had how many properties under your belt when you decided to retire?
At that time, we had, from memory, 11 properties.
Okay.
We bought them pretty rapidly. They were good properties, and then we decided to reduce our loans. So we sold a few, and the whole portfolio was positive back then. It still is. Yes, you're right. It was boredom. You still need to generate cash. And I think the easiest way to insanity is not to have anything to do, not to have any challenges.
Absolutely.
On a day-to-day basis.
One of the first conversations I remember I had with you was around where you were buying at that period of time, and that was the sort of Campbelltown, Liverpool,
correct,
southwest Sydney.
Yes.
So you, for a period of time, from when you started in 1998, 1999, when you got your first Campbelltown property, you probably spent a good 10 years just concentrating on that particular market segment. So the majority of the properties you were purchasing were within that belt, and you were attracted to that belt because they were reasonably priced properties. There was a demand for property in those areas, rental properties in that area. You can pick them up reasonably cheap, and you got very good at identifying what was a good property versus what was not a so good property, and that being what was a good property in terms of what's going to go up in capital growth, and what was also a good property, something that actually provides a good cash flow return on it. So can you tell me a little bit about how you started to work out? When did you really start getting in your rhythm of being able to look at something quickly and go, that's a good property? And you probably still use the same metrics today to evaluate a purchase opportunity.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to basic fundamentals. And all the seminars, all the books teach the same fundamentals. they're all just dressed up differently. So what I did in our initial years was we actually went out and educated ourselves with all of those seminars out there, all of these books. So I attended high-end seminars, I attended the intro seminars, just to get all the information.
Did you spend money on education?
Absolutely, we did, and we actually did a audit as to how much we had spent in the first 3 years, and we had actually spent about 80K in educating ourselves. Now, did it pay dividends? Just one deal paid double that in our portfolio. So it was well worth it, yeah.
So you'd encourage people to do paid education?
At that time when I started, obviously Google wasn't as prevalent.
Yeah, true.
Now, I would say that you Google everything first. There's a lot of free information out there. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there that you can use. I was going there. Yeah. So, you do that first. But certainly, I'm a strong advocate of paying for good information. But the caveat on that is you got to take action after that. I mean, it's no sense being a seminar junkie, because then all you're doing is just getting hyped up, and you're hooked to the hype rather than the result, and that's fairly important. So with us, that's what we did. Was we got into the fundamentals of it, and the fundamentals are pretty simple. We try and stay away from regional areas. We try and stay away from mining towns or areas that have got only one economical driver. And what we try and do is limit ourselves to within an hour's travel distance to CBD. But you've got to define CBD. So that's your employment hub. Yeah, and then of course you look at comparables of what's brand new selling for in that area, and within a kilometer radius of the brand new developments, you buy older comparable properties with a differential of at least 100,000 between old and new, and you can't go wrong.
And that still holds true today?
It still holds true today.
So you talk about CBDs, right? So Campbelltown is a CBD.
Correct.
I don't know the population out there now, but it's growing rapidly, and it's a satellite town.
That's right.
Liverpool,
absolutely.
Satellite town. So these are places where people don't need to come to the CBD of Sydney. They live and breathe. There's restaurants, cafes, sporting grounds, schools. Everyone lives within those particular areas. And did you find that when you were buying in those sort of Campbelltown, Liverpool areas, that you saw those drivers, people who were renting in these places, live and breathe those areas? They don't really go outside of it, and that's what maintains that positive pressure on prices, but also rents.
Yeah. Look, the first few properties, now, we were not concentrating on that. We didn't know what we were doing. We bumbled our way through it.
Yeah.
And it was like any other investor, we invested close to home. It just happened to be in a good area.
So do you think you got lucky?
I got lucky in the initial stages. Then I educated myself, and that's what I look for. So if I'm...
So did you try to reaffirm, I'm doing the right things, yes, I was lucky that I chose this area, but then you went to reaffirm all the reasons why you were good at it? Or did you truly challenge the areas that you were actually investing in to determine whether or not they were the right place?
A bit of both. So in my initial portfolio, the first few properties I bought, once I really got... good at it, and this is a learned skill. It's not something you get born with. Once I really got good at it, I went back and double checked. Okay, why did this property work out well? So what were the attributes? And basically, we try to replicate that in other areas, in other states. We're looking at for the same characteristics, demographic changes, the cafe culture opening up in that area, and all that sort of stuff. I always stayed away from inner city. And in terms of CBD, so CBD is defined in two levels. So you've got your CBD proper, which is postcode 2000, postcode 3000, and so forth. So I invest within an hour's car travel distance from there.
Okay.
So that's my radius. Then within that, I look at your sub CBDs like your Liverpools, your Campbelltowns, your Parramatta's, and I invest within 10 minutes distance of those CBDs.
That's very smart. Victor, what's your portfolio sitting at now in terms of LVR?
So overall, LVR is sitting at around the 75% mark.
Okay.
Some properties are at 90% of purchase value. Others are at 60% of purchase value.
And that just depends on where they are in their cycle.
That's right. Yeah. And it's important to differentiate that the LVR that I'm talking about is against market value, not necessarily the bank value. So my earlier comment that you should hold your property portfolio LVR at 80%, that's 80% of your market value. Because the banks will always be more conservative in valuing your property.
And your appetite sitting at 75% is, you're okay with that in terms of your level of debt to the value of your properties?
I'm pretty okay with that, yes.
Obviously with a portfolio of a substantial size, there is say rates go up or something happens in your life, you need cash or anything like that, do you have an exit? Do you have here's my immediate short-term fix if I get into a bit of a problem on a property, and here's my longer-term plan should I need to sell down or should I need to get out, or how do you balance all that?
Yep. So I've got my sleep at night money, which I call sleep at night, because then if the world goes into chaos, I've got at least 3 months of repayment with no rental income coming in across
your
my
whole portfolio.
Okay.
Yep. So that's a fair chunk.
That's right. That's a fair chunk.
Yep.
And then I also look at, you've got to manage your biggest expense, which is your interest component. And I'm a strong believer at, if your property's done what it needs to do, you fix that mortgage over a long period of time. With a portfolio my size, I have to be really careful that they don't come online at the same time. So you don't get all the 5-year fixed rates popping up at the same time, because you could be coming into a fairly high interest rate climate, and that could kill your cash flow.
So as a percentage of the number of properties in your portfolio versus how many were vacant at any one time, what's the worst it's got?
At the moment, I've got no properties that are vacant.
Okay.
Sorry, I lie. I've got one property that I'm renovating right now, which I've purchased recently in Melbourne, which is vacant because the renovation's still going on it.
It's normally sitting nearly 100% occupied, your portfolio?
Nearly 100% occupied. And you've got to be smart about it. Often to get a tenant in, drop your rent $5-10. I mean, it's cheaper to get a tenant in $5 less than holding out for 3 weeks to get that extra $5.
We'll have to get you in for another podcast. I'd like to chat about how you manage your portfolio, because I struggle with mine, and it's nowhere near the size of yours. It's bonkers. So we're going to have to wrap up, mate. But when we get investors coming, we always ask sort of some very similar questions. What's the worst performing property in your portfolio, and why is that the case?
The worst performing property is one that I bought, and you make mistakes when you get 3 things in the way. One is greed, one is ego, and the other is plain old stupidity. Yeah, and this was all 3. So I bought a serviced apartment up in the Newcastle Way, up Central Coast, and with the thought of taking my friends and my family there, spending the weekends up there and so forth. And that was about 7 years ago. I've been up there 4 times.
I've heard that story. It's very familiar with a lot of people.
Yes.
Follow the dream and try and get a lifestyle property, and they never just use it. So what's the property in your portfolio that is just in terms of growth, that's just gone out of control and it's blown you away?
It has to be my first property. I mean, I didn't expect it to go as well as it did, and then every property after that, most of them have had good stories to them. Some go really well in terms of growth. Others are much slower. You just have to be patient with them.
And it's just repetition, really. It's about following a system and a cycle that you do time and time and time again.
That's right.
So what would you tell yourself 19 years ago? What would Victor today say to Victor of 1997, other than don't buy the serviced apartment?
Really, I think it'd be to think things through first. So get more focused as to what you're trying to achieve, rather than, I want to buy 10 properties, I want to buy 50 properties, whatever the number is. Don't focus on the number, focus on the outcome, and focus on the end cash flow, and give yourself a time frame.
I need to wrap this up. I've got a few more questions. I'm going to stick with it. So I'm sorry, Adam, our producer, that we're going to have to keep going, mate, but I'm sure our listeners will like it. Do you have a number of different mortgage brokers, or you just use one, or do you do just your own stuff? How do you do that these days? So
what you'll find is that as your portfolio grows, as the finance market changes, and as your needs change, you do outgrow your standard broker, and it's good to get someone that's also an investor, that can see the same picture that you're seeing, so they can then put it on paper and put it in front of the lender. So yes, occasionally I do change brokers. I'm onto a couple. I use a couple of brokers for my portfolio, because some specialize on trusts, others specialize on personal name purchases, and so forth. So I use 3 brokers for my portfolio.
And you invest in all structures, personal,
pretty
trust,
much,
depending
yes.
where you're buying, what you're buying, what the long-term plans are for it, and all that sort of stuff.
That's right. And then I also have a mantra that, look, if the only way you can get a property is in a particular entity or in just your name, just do it and sort it out later. Grab the opportunity.
And banks are happy to still lend you money?
They still lend me 90% at the moment.
Okay, so no serviceability problems in terms of, we all get to a point where banks start asking for a lot more information.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's firing along, no problems there?
Yeah, every time I get to a new lender, they have a heart attack because they've seen so many credit hits, they see so many properties, they see so many rental statements and entities. So it's really confusing. So I have to actually draw out a map for them as to how the money flows and so forth.
Yeah.
But once you've educated the lender, it becomes really easy.
I always say to my mortgage broker, I feel sorry for him to get me finance. He's got to work so much harder than anyone else for, $200,000 or $300,000 bucks on a borrow. It's hard work. So just finish up, mate. So we're going to get you to come back in a couple of weeks. I just want to keep chatting about how you're seeing the market at the moment and where you're buying, how you're buying, and the type of work you're doing as a professional. But just finish up. So what if Smart Property Investment said, Victor, mate, we're going to give you your next deposit for your next property, and we need you to go out and buy something tomorrow. Where would it be and what would it be?
That's a good question. It depends on the size of the deposit, obviously, and whether I can get finance. But I'd be investing still in the mortgage belt areas, but I wouldn't stray outside of New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria or South Australia, because these are the markets that in the pockets that I invest is still trending upwards. Most of the markets actually plateauing down or in a downward trend. So if you look at Western Australia and all of those areas, and some states don't rate. That's where I'd be putting my money in. Okay,
brilliant. My biggest takeaway from this chat, mate, would be that I really like your very simplified way to look at how to assess an opportunity, and that is 1 hour from a major CBD, so your capital, so 2,000 postcode, 3,000 postcode, etc., and about 10 minutes away from a major regional sub-CD, so in Sydney to be like a Parramatta or a Blacktown or a Liverpool and stuff. So that's really good. Thanks for so much coming on. Really do appreciate it, Victor. Viv, thanks again.
Thanks, Phil.
We'll get you to come and join us again when we chat with Victor, and probably get you a little bit more involved when we start talking about the market. If everyone just remember, thanks for tuning in. We're trending really well with our podcasts. We're one of the highest ranked property podcasts on iTunes. So we appreciate you listening, and please do keep it up. You can connect with us on smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Check it out. There's articles, stories, profiles, everything you need to be a smarter property investor and maintain that education, as Victor said, was awfully important. You can follow me at Philip Tarrant on Twitter, or you can follow Smart Property Investment across all the usual social media stuff. If you like us, please rate us 5-star on iTunes, and we'll keep doing what we're doing. Thanks for joining us, and we'll chat again soon.